The backstage area of America's Got Talent buzzed with nervous energy. Contestants pacing, crew members adjusting lights, makeup artists doing last-second touch-ups. But in the far corner, away from the noise, stood 16-year-old Marco Reyes, dressed in a simple white shirt and black slacks. Nothing about him stood out at first glance, except the quiet intensity in his eyes and the old wooden carpenter's pencil held tightly in his right hand. It wasn't just a pencil. It was the last thing his father ever handed to him. Marco rolled it between his fingers, feeling the faded grooves carved into its surface. His father used it every day in the small workshop behind their modest home in Quezon City. Even after losing him, Marco kept the pencil as a promise that one day his voice would build a better life than his father's hands ever could. A producer walking by suddenly stopped in her tracks. She stared for a moment, then her eyes widened. Wait, Marco? Marco Reyes? He gave a shy smile. Hi, Miss Jenna. Oh my God, you're taller. Wow, you're back? She rushed over and hugged him. We haven't seen you since season 19, right? Season 18, Marco corrected quietly. 4 years ago. Back then, Marco was a small, fragile 12-year-old boy with a trembling voice and oversized confidence. He had made the judges smile, even shed a tear or two, but he didn't make it through the judge cuts. Simon had told him, "You have something special. You're just not ready yet." Marco remembered going home disappointed but determined. His father had placed a hand on his shoulder and said, "Next time, Anak. You'll be ready." But a year later, his father was gone. Jenna touched his arm gently. "I heard about your dad. I'm so sorry." Marco swallowed hard. "I'm here because of him." She nodded, understanding without needing more words. "Well, I can tell you one thing. Everyone here is rooting for you." As she walked away, Marco exhaled slowly, then looked toward the thick black curtain separating backstage from the main stage. Through the cracks, he could see the glow of the AGT logo and hear the thunderous applause for the contestant performing before him. He closed his eyes. He felt his heartbeat slowing into focus. He whispered, "Papa, guide me." Meanwhile, out on the judges' panel, Simon Cowell sat with his arms folded, studying the stage with his usual sharp, unreadable expression. Sofia Vergara laughed at something Heidi Klum said, while Howie Mandel waved at the audience like a comedian warming up a crowd. But Simon, though still calm, looked tired. Tonight's lineup had been hit or miss. A few good acts, but nothing remarkable. He leaned back in his chair, pressed the bridge of his nose, and muttered, "Let's hope the next one isn't another juggling chicken act." The audience laughed. Backstage, Marco heard his cue. Next up, Marco Reyes from the Philippines. His breath hitched. A sudden flash of memory burst through him. His father teaching him how to sand wood, both of them humming the same tune, his father's voice telling him, "You raise me up, Anak. More than you know." That song, that was the one he was going to sing tonight. The stage manager, a tall man with a headset and a clipboard, approached Marco. "All right, buddy, you're up next. Step right here for me." Marco nodded and took his place behind the curtain. The lights beyond it flashed and flickered. The crowd settled. The host spoke his name again, louder this time. Marco's fingers curled around the carpenter pencil so tightly he could feel the edges pressing into his skin. "Whenever you're ready," the stage manager whispered. Marco nodded, inhaled, then stepped forward, and stopped, not from fear, but from emotion. The moment his shoe touched the wooden stage floor, a wave of memories washed over him, from the small Manila workshop to their cramped living room where he practiced singing every night, to the moment he last stood on this exact same stage as a little boy who didn't, no heartbreak yet. He could smell the fresh wood polish from the stage props. He could hear the soft hum of the crowd. He could feel the weight of his father's dream on his shoulders. Then he walked into the spotlight. The audience murmured instantly. Simon leaned forward, narrowing his eyes. He recognized the face, but the boy in front of him now looked different, stronger, steadier, older. His hair was neater, his posture straighter, but what hadn't changed was the sincerity in his eyes. Sophia whispered, "Is that the little kid from years ago?" Heidi gasped softly, "That's him! He looks so grown." Marco reached the center of the stage. The lights were warm on his skin. His heart pounded, not with fear, but with purpose. The host asked, "Welcome back. How old are you now?" 16, Marco said, his voice calm but carrying a tremor of something deeper. Heidi smiled warmly. "Tell us, what brought you back to Agd?" Marco hesitated, glancing briefly at the carpenter pencil hidden between his fingers. He took a breath. I'm here, to sing for someone I lost. His voice cracked, just slightly, but enough for the audience to feel it. Simon's expression shifted. The change was subtle but real. His eyes softened, curiosity growing into concern. Who did you lose? Simon asked quietly. Marco swallowed. My father. He was a carpenter. He used to build things with his hands. He taught me everything about hard work. He supported my dreams even when life was very hard. His voice trembled. This is the pencil he used every day. I kept it with me because I want him to still be here. The entire room stilled. Sophia put a hand over her heart. Heidi blinked back, a tear already forming. Howie lowered his head, touched. And Simon, usually stoic, leaned even closer. There was recognition in his eyes now, not just of the boy he once judged, but of a young man standing in front of him with a story heavy enough to shape a voice. Marco continued softly, I wasn't ready before, but now, I sing with a different heart. He lifted his chin, his eyes shining. The judges nodded, the audience leaned in, the lights dimmed into a single soft glow over him. Simon whispered, barely audible to the mic. All right, Marco, show us who you are now. Marco took one final deep breath, closed his eyes, touched the pencil once more, and prepared to deliver the song that would change everything. The theater fell into a rare kind of silence, the kind so deep that even the cameras seemed to hold their breath. Marco stood alone under the spotlight, the vast AGT stage stretching around him like an ocean. He held his father's carpenter pencil with a gentle grip, as if letting go would make the memory disappear. The soft instrumental cue began, a single piano note, fragile and echoing like the first tear of a storm. Marco opened his eyes. For a moment, he didn't sing. He simply breathed in, grounding himself. The lights dimmed behind him, leaving his figure bathed in a soft, warm glow. The audience shifted forward in unison. Even the judges leaned in, not as celebrities, but as human beings waiting to feel something real. And then, he sang, not loud, not showy, not trying to impress, just honest. When I am down, and oh my soul so weary. The first line floated through the theater like a whisper from a distant memory. His voice had changed since he was 12, deeper, steadier, but it still carried that trembling sincerity that made people listen. Simon's eyebrows lifted just slightly. This wasn't the same boy. This was someone who had lived. Marco's voice carried a gentle ache, the kind that couldn't be faked. There was a softness at the edges, as though each note held a story he had kept buried for years. The camera zoomed in on his face, eyes glistening, jaw trembling, but he remained focused. Behind him, the screen flickered to life. It began with a simple image, a small wooden workshop in the Philippines, sunlit, humble, and full of memory. Marco didn't know they were going to show the footage. His chest tightened when he recognized the place. His father's workbench, the creaking wooden chair, the shelves filled with tools worn from a lifetime of work. The audience gasped softly. The piano swelled as Marco stepped into the pre-chorus. His voice rose, each word soaked with longing. Until you come, and sit a while with me. On the screen, a video of young Marco appeared. He was small, barefoot, sitting beside his father as the older man sanded a wooden frame. They were laughing about something simple, something ordinary, something that felt impossibly far away now. Marco's voice cracked just a hair on sit a while, but it only made the moment more real. Sofia Vergara pressed her hand to her heart. Heidi Klum blinked rapidly, mascara threatening to smudge. Howie Mandel nodded slowly, eyes glistening. But Simon's composure began to fracture. He stared at the stage, pupils glinting with emotion he rarely showed. His jaw clenched, he swallowed. The boy was singing straight into something inside him, something he didn't let the world see. The music shifted into the chorus. Marco took a deeper breath. The carpenter pencil slipped slightly in his hand. He tightened his grip, anchoring himself to it like a lifeline. And then his voice soared. You raise me up. The strength in his voice burst like sunlight breaking through clouds. His tone was pure, resonant, filled with controlled power he didn't have years ago. The screen showed more clips. Marco's father guiding his hand on a ruler, their tiny home, a shot of Marco singing in a church, eyes closed, his father smiling proudly from a pew. Footage from the old AGT season. Marco as a boy, nervous, singing his heart out. The audience murmured, hands rising to mouths. Marco's eyes shimmered with tears he refused to let fall. "So I can stand on mountains." A soft sob echoed from somewhere in the crowd. The lights behind Marco expanded, turning golden, warm, heavenly, almost like a sunrise. The stage designers had prepared the perfect moment, but even they hadn't expected his voice to carry it with such devastating emotion. Marco pushed into the next line. "You raise me up to walk on stormy seas." His voice shook, then stabilized. He sang with the raw, vulnerable honesty of someone singing to the one person who would never hear him again. The judges didn't blink. Sophia covered her mouth, completely overwhelmed. Heidi wiped a tear from her cheek. Howie whispered, "Wow," barely audible. And Simon's eyes were wet. He lowered his head for a moment, pinching the bridge of his nose, failing to compose himself. His shoulders rose and fell with a steadying breath. Marco hit the highest note of the chorus, his voice cracking, not from nerves, but heartbreak. It was the kind of break that made the note more beautiful, not less. The audience erupted into applause mid-song, unable to hold back. But Marco didn't look at them. He looked up, as if singing directly to heaven. The music softened into the bridge. Marco's voice quieted again, but the fragility in his tone now felt like an open woo. "ND, you raise me up, to more than I can be." The screen behind him faded into a single image. His father's hands, rough, strong, holding that same carpenter pencil. Marco almost lost his composure. His lips trembled, his eyes filled with tears. But he held the note, steady and sure, channeling every ounce of grief and love into it. By now, half the audience was crying, a mother clutching her son, a man wiping tears into his sleeve, two teenagers hugging each other, an elderly woman sobbing openly. Even the production crew backstage watched through monitors with red eyes. Marco stepped forward into the final chorus, his voice swelling into something larger than the stage itself. This wasn't just singing, it was releasing years of pain. It was healing a wound he never thought would close. It was thanking the man who believed in him before anyone else did. He held the final note, long and trembling, his voice echoing through the theater like a prayer sent upward. The music faded. Marco let the note fall softly like a sigh. There was silence, a silence so profound it felt sacred. And then, the entire theater erupted. People stood, people screamed, people cried openly. Marco trembled, his chest rising and falling, the carpenter pencil still gripped in his hand. Tears streamed down his face, but he didn't wipe them. He let them fall. And for the first time he allowed himself to believe. "Papa, are you proud?" For a long moment after the final note faded, the auditorium remained frozen. No shuffling, no breathing, no whispers. It felt as though Marco had pressed pause on the entire universe. His voice still lingered in the air like a fragile echo, drifting through the silence he had created. Marco stood on stage trembling, his chest rising and falling as though he had just climbed a mountain. The carpenter's pencil was still clutched tight in his hand, its edges now leaving faint red marks in his palm. Tears streamed freely down his cheeks, but he didn't wipe them away. He let them fall with the same honesty that he had sung with. And then, the room exploded. Audience members shot to their feet as if pulled by an invisible force. The applause thundered across the theater, rolling like a tidal wave of pure emotion. Some screamed his name, some cried openly. Some pressed hands over their hearts, unable to speak. Marco's eyes widened in shock. 3 years ago, he stood on this stage and heard polite claps, encouraging smiles, soft praise. But now, it was as if the entire world was holding him up. Sofia Vergara stood first among the judges, her hands shaking as she applauded. Her mascara streaked in watery smudges as she let out a breathless, "Oh my God! Oh my God!" Heidi Klum rose next, wiping both cheeks with a tissue she grabbed from under the table, smiling through tears as she clapped with genuine relief, as if something heavy inside her had just been freed. Howie Mandel simply pressed both palms to his face, shaking his head in disbelief. When he finally stood, he looked at Marco not with pity, but with admiration reserved for people who transcend hardship. But Simon stayed seated. He wasn't being disrespectful. He wasn't judging. He was trying and failing to hold himself together. His eyes glistened under the stage lights, his lips pressed into a hard line. He exhaled through his nose and stared at the table as if gathering himself, as if trying to hide the rawness in his expression. Then he lifted his head. The camera zoomed close. The audience gasped. Simon Cowell was crying. A single tear slid down his cheek before he could wipe it away, and when he did wipe it, 2 more escaped. He blinked, shook his head, swallowed hard. He looked at Marco the way a father looks at a child who has finally found their voice. Marco's breath hitched. For a moment he felt 12 years old again, standing in front of the man who once told him, "You're not ready yet." But now Simon wasn't judging him. He was feeling him. Finally, Simon stood. He didn't stand abruptly. He didn't snap up like the others. He rose slowly, deliberately, as though the moment required reverence. The audience saw it and roared louder. Simon pressed his hand to his heart. Marco brought a trembling hand to his mouth, overcome. After several seconds, the applause softened, then faded, until the room was quiet again. Everyone waiting for Simon to speak. Even the air seemed to hang still. Simon leaned into the microphone. His voice cracked. He closed his eyes for a moment, steadying himself. When he opened them again, they were glossy, but focused. "Marco," he began slowly, you did something very rare tonight." Marco blinked, his tears falling freely. Simon cleared his throat, but it barely cleared his emotions. "When you first came on this stage as a little boy, I remember you. I remember how much you wanted this." His voice wavered slightly. "And I remember telling you that you weren't ready. It wasn't a criticism, it was just the truth." Marco nodded, his chin trembling. "But tonight," Simon continued, his voice deepening with emotion, "you didn't just come back ready. You came back transformed." He paused, struggling for a moment. Your father would be so proud of the man you've grown into. I think he raised you up, more than you realize." A soft gasp spread across the audience. Marco covered his face for a moment, overwhelmed. "And," Simon added, lifting a hand toward him, "you just made all of us feel something incredibly powerful." Sophia sniffled loudly. "He made all of us cry, Simon." The crowd laughed through tears. Simon smiled faintly, then looked down the golden buzzer in front of him. Marco's breath stopped. The judges exchanged looks. Heidi covered her mouth, already knowing what was coming. Sophia bounced slightly in her seat. Howie nodded eagerly, whispering, "Do it, do it." Simon didn't look at the other judges. He looked only at Marco. "Marco Reyes," Simon said softly, "this is the moment your father dreamed of, and I'm honored to be a part of it." He lifted his hand. The audience screamed. Marco froze. Simon slammed the golden buzzer. Everything happened at once. A burst of golden light exploded from the stage. Confetti cannons erupted overhead, raining shimmering gold flakes that floated like falling stars. Marco's shoulders jolted. His mouth dropped open in disbelief. He looked up, watching the golden storm descend, swirling around him like an embrace from heaven itself. He sank to his knees, sobbing, not out of sadness but out of relief, fulfillment, and the overwhelming sense that his father was with him right then, in that very moment. The host rushed onto the stage, hugging him tightly as the golden confetti clung to Marco's hair, his clothes, his face. The audience rose again, cheering louder than they had all night. Behind the judges' table, Simon stood straight, chest rising and falling, emotion still visible on his face. Sophia leaned toward him and whispered, "You okay?" He nodded, wiping a final tear. "That was special. That was really special." Marco looked up toward the ceiling, letting the confetti fall into his open palms. He whispered through trembling lips, "Para que papa." The cameras zoomed in on his face as he closed his eyes, clutching the carpenter pencil to his heart, surrounded by a rain of gold. Backstage, producers cried. Crew members hugged each other, and on screen the episode closed with a final shot of Simon Cowell, still standing, still emotional, murmuring, "You wait years for a moment like that." And this time, the world agreed.